Hi, my name is Devin Totherow, and I'm here to present my Silk Road Artifacts debate argument. My argument is that Silk Road artifacts should not be returned to their countries of origin, but rather to the ethnic groups which the artifacts belong to. The first scholar that I have is a proponent of my argument, and this is Justin Jacobs in his Confronting Indiana Jones article. In this article, Jacobs' thesis is that Chinese archaeologists imitated Western imperialists, but used discourse of criminalization of Westerners as a red herring to distract from China's own imperialist ambitions and actions in the northwestern regions of China. And specifically in his article, he talks about Oriel Stein, who is a famous Western archaeologist who took a lot of manuscripts and artifacts from China back into Europe. And this is just a picture of him right here. So one of the quotes that I picked out specifically from his article was, by 1943, Chinese Dunhuang scholars scarcely batted an eye at the prospect of publishing a serious scholarly examination of a bilingual Brahmi Chinese Dunhuang stele that not only entirely ignored the non-Chinese portion of the stele, but actually went so far as to whitewash into historical oblivion any trace of the rival foreign language on the stele's surface. And you can see I included a picture of this from his article. This is a sketch of the stele that he's referring to, and as you can see, all the Chinese characters were left and a translation was offered, but for the Brahmi text, they removed any notion of that language and simply put Brahmi on there. So completely getting rid of that artifact's connection to the Brahmi people. So, as according to Jacobs, China continued to plunder the northwestern region without abandon while asserting Chinese Han's primacy. And Chinese Hans are the largest population in the world, but they're also the largest population in China. And these are the original Chinese peoples. People like the Brahmi or the descendants of the Brahmi, and later on, who I'll talk about, the Uyghur people are the ethnic minorities in China. So by erasing these artifacts' connection to those ethnic minorities, they're asserting the superiority of the Chinese Han people. And Jacobs asserts that in his article as well. So for this reason, Jacobs argues that ethnic minorities within China should have their artifacts returned to them as the mainland. As such, Justin Jacobs is a major scholar activist. Next is my opponent argument, which is based off the UNESCO document for the Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the Event of Armed Conflict, with regulations for the execution of the convention in 1954. And this convention article had some good points, as it laid out a definition for cultural property and kind of respected cultural property as a whole. My first quote is, "Damage to cultural property belonging to any people whatsoever means damage to the cultural heritage of all mankind, since each people makes its contribution to the culture of the world," which clearly asserts that each of these artifacts, especially these minority artifacts, need to be preserved. However, later on in the article, also states that the Director General of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization shall cause the registration of any property to be cancelled, here's the important part, at the request of the high contracting party within whose territory the cultural property is situated. Now that part is important because this legal and binding agreement only considers territory in regards to the current governing body over a region. For instance, in terms of China, the Chinese government could effectively take any Uyghur artifact they desired, since Uyghur territory is situated within China and has to report to China. The same could be said for Native American nations within the U.S., such as the Cherokee or Navajo. And one of the reasons why UNESCO supports nations rather than the minority groups in these nations is because those governing bodies are the ones UNESCO interacts with. They were called the high contracting party in this document. Obviously, there's some selection bias at play here as to who can be a part of UNESCO and who UNESCO will protect. However, it could be argued that ethnic minorities do not possess enough political authority, nor can they command enough resources to adequately protect artifacts, which is another reason why they may not be included in this, and one reason why they give nations this power instead of the ethnic minorities. But in any case, activism to promote the rights of these ethnic minorities under UNESCO policies is few and far between, and hopefully in the future this issue will be brought into the spotlight so that these ethnic minorities can have a say in what happens with their artifacts and many other policies that UNESCO deals with. Finally, one specific artifact I wanted to talk about was the Mummies of Urumqi, which is right here on the map. And there was a recent controversy concerning the famous and well-preserved Caucasian mummies of Urumqi. These Caucasian mummies highlight the need for ethnic groups to own their artifacts instead of the governing body over their territory. The mummies are usually displayed in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region and were excavated near there in the Tarim Basin. And this map is just a picture of the Tarim Basin, which is situated right in Uyghur territory. So they were excavated from there, and they're always on display in this region. The mummies themselves are somewhat of a mystery, as they're Caucasian and not Han Chinese, which shows how significant other ethnic groups are in this region. So in 2011, the mummies, including the beauty of Zhao He, were scheduled to be displayed at the University of Pennsylvania's Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology from February 5th to June 5th. However, the Chinese government decided to limit the permission they originally granted to the Penn Museum, taking the mummies back to China. Input from the Uyghur Autonomous Region, and is detrimental to the spread of knowledge that these artifacts should be used for. If the Autonomous Region had had any say in their artifacts, then they might have allowed them to be on display in the Penn Museum for a much longer period of time, and therefore more people could have seen them. It's also very important for these ethnic minority artifacts to be on display in order for people to understand these cultures that don't always get represented. For instance, today there's a lot of talk about the Uyghurs, specifically in regards to tragedies such as the concentration camps in China, but not a lot of people know their story or about them. So having these artifacts on display in other countries and around the world would give these ethnic minorities the exposure they need in order to have their voices heard and have their rights promoted for. Here's a list of all my sources, and thank you for listening to my presentation.